All right, Hobbs Middle School Civics. Next video, Chapter 4, Lesson 3, Disagreements with Great Britain. Lots of good stuff in this lesson and a lot of good stuff that they like to put on the EOC. Ideally, after the end of this lesson, you're going to be able to trace the timeline and the series of events of the things that happen that change the colonists into loyal Englishmen and women, into people who are so fed up and so angry with their government, they are going to rebel, fight a war, and declare independence and start their new country, United States of America. So it starts with ideas. We talked about the Enlightenment before. This is an age of reason. This is an age of science. People are applying science to their lives, and people are going to apply reason and science and thought to ideas of government. Why do we do things the way we do? Why don't we change them? Are there better forms of government? So these Enlightenment philosophers are thinking these big thoughts and these big ideas. The Awakening is this religious revival where these religious preachers start saying, hey, look, you don't need a preacher in a church to tell you how to relate, how you worship your God. No. All you need is the Bible. You can figure the rest out yourself. So the ideas of the Awakening and the Enlightenment come together in this big mental thought team. And people like these Americans here in the 1740s, 50s, and 60s start thinking, hey, look, why don't I evaluate my relationship with my government myself? Why don't I ask questions? Why don't I use my reason? This inspires Americans towards the idea of personal freedom and liberty and asking questions. What's the deal with a king? Why do I listen to a parliament that's thousands of miles away from me and I don't get to vote for? This is going to start the ball rolling. These thought processes, the Great Awakening and the Enlightenment are going to get colonists to wonder, why am I listening to a king in a parliament that I don't get to vote for and don't listen to me? Cool. This great Enlightenment philosopher that you must know, John Locke. He's silent. Please don't call him Lockie. John Locke. He writes these ideas down, and the educated colonists read and start understanding their Locke. Remember, the key points about Locke is this idea of natural rights. You are born with natural rights. This isn't something the government gives you like a treat or a snack or an award. No. As soon as you're born, you have these natural rights. And it's government's job to protect your rights, not take your rights away from you. These natural rights that Locke talk about, life, liberty, and property. Everybody gets these rights. Everybody's equal at birth. Government should protect these rights. Locke agrees with Hobbes and other philosophers that there's a social contract, there's an agreement between the citizen and the government. The citizen agrees to give up some rights. I can't drive at 100 miles an hour down 90 to Chick-fil-A. I can't steal, I can't rob, I can't light people's houses on fire. So they lose these rights, but they gain in that the rest of their rights are protected by this thing called government. So that's the social contract. Locke says, I combined Hobbes and Locke. Locke says, if the government isn't fulfilling its part of the social contract, if government isn't protecting your rights, guess what? You have the right and the duty to get rid of that government. Okay? So, Hobbes and social contract and Locke's idea of natural rights and the improvement on social contract, very important. These colonists, who are Englishmen and women, they look at the rights they get in colonial America and they compare it to rights an Englishman gets in London. And they see they're different. An Englishman in London gets a certain right that the colonists don't get, which is the right to vote for a representative in Parliament. Oh, huge difference. And the colonists, they're not dumb. They know their Locke, and they start saying, hey, If I don't have a say in this government, if this government is not protecting my natural rights, it should change. Key to understand this. So over time, the colonists are thinking, I don't vote for a member of parliament. I don't vote for these royal governors that the king appoints to run my colony. And of course I don't get to vote for a king, right, or a queen. So if these governments are making decisions for me and doing things like taxing me, and I have no say in it, that's a violation of the social contract. This government isn't protecting my rights. I'm not getting to enjoy my full freedom and my full liberty. Then I need to change the deal. I need a new government. Cool. That's where we're headed. All right. Now we talk about war, the French and Indian War. If we remember, in the 1750s, 60s, where the English colonies against the east coast of the United States. And the border has been roughly the Appalachian Mountains. On the east coast of the British colonists, on the other side of the Appalachians are what? Native Americans, of course, they've always been there. And this is French territory now. But the colonists look over there and they're like, there's really no French there. There's no French government. There's not a French army preventing me to go on this French territory. There's Native Americans. But the colonists really aren't big into respecting the rights of Native Americans, and they're not afraid at all of going into that land and taking it for themselves. Well, this is a problem. Native Americans don't like it, and neither do the French. So the French king gets angry. He starts sending French officers to team up with the Native Americans. They raid the colonists' farms and homes and kill colonists and kidnap and take the women and children away as slaves. Colonists, of course, don't like that. They form these small armies called militias, and they fight back. This war going on back and forth between the British colonists and the French and Indians turned into a full-scale worldwide war called, at least on our part of the Atlantic Ocean, the French and Indian War. And the British Army and the colonists prevail. They win the French and Indian War. Great! But that causes problems. The colonists are going to assume that since we won this war, we can get all this land now. And I have these big farms, and I make money, and I get married, and I have economic opportunity. Awesome, right? No. The British king and parliament are going to say, hey, colonists, stay on your side of the Appalachian Mountains. Don't go into those lands. Leave the Native Americans alone in these lands. Why? Because the king's really concerned about the rights of Native Americans? No. The king knows, though, wars are expensive. He just got done fighting one, and now he's in debt. He spent all his money to pay for that long and expensive war. So he doesn't want the colonies starting any more fights with the Native Americans. So he issues the proclamation of 1763, which basically says, English colonists, stay on this side of this line. Stay on this side of the Appalachian Mountains. You can't miss them. They're right there. They're mountains. Don't go on the other side and start more wars with the Native Americans. The colonists, do they take this reasonably and say, oh yeah, that makes sense? No, they're furious. They had naturally assumed that they'd get all that cool land. And now the king's telling them no. Ooh, colonists are upset. Then it gets worse. Colonists have had to pay taxes in the past, but who's giving them these taxes? Their own colonial assemblies and governments. Their House of Burgesses that they get to contribute to elect their fellow colonists to these local governments, these local assemblies. Sure, they've been taxed by them, but they haven't been taxed by the king and parliament in like 100 years. So King George III, he says, hey, colonists, you started this war. You might as well help me pay for it. He starts taxing the colonies. Parliament passes the Stamp Act. The colonists lose their minds. They are very angry that Parliament and the king are going to tax them. Why? Remember, amongst other problems, nobody likes paying taxes, but the big part is they're being taxed by a parliament they don't get to vote for. They have no representation. So the slogan is, no taxation without representation. I don't want to pay a tax that I had no say in. And that's extremely fair. That makes sense. I don't like getting taxed today, but the people who are taxing me, I get an opportunity to vote out of office, right? Great. So, taxation, this stamp act, this stamp tax is going to infuriate the colonists. And physically, what was this tax? If you bought paper products, if you had business deals, if you had legal paperwork, all this stuff had to go to the tax collector who put a stamp on it, you know, like a ink stamp. You paid the tax. Was it a lot of money? Not really. It was more the principle of anything else. All right? Great. Oh, and it's on paper products, like stuff lawyers use, or newspapers. Who do you not want to make angry? Lawyers and newspapers. Think about it. The colonists respond with protests, and the colonists respond with a boycott. They are going to get back at the king by boycotting British goods. I could see a colonist saying, all right, you're going to hit me in my pocketbook, I'm going to hit you in yours. You're going to tax me, I'm not going to buy British products. See how your British companies like that, Parliament and King? And guess what? It works. In a relatively short period of time, Parliament repeals, officially takes away the Stamp Act. Have the colonists won this major thing? Not really. Because in something called the Declaratory Act, Parliament and the king are going to say, hey, guess what, colonists? We'll let you win this one. But don't misunderstand. We can tax you whenever we want. We can pretty much do whatever we want to you. Yikes. Language like that is not going to make the colonists happy, and it doesn't. And then almost immediately after the Stamp Act is repealed, the British government, Parliament, enacts the Townshend Acts. These are new taxes. These are duties on imported goods. What's an import? Any good product that's coming from overseas into the colonies. Imports. So these imports would be taxed. So I'm a businessman, I'm getting imported goods, I'm getting beer from Holland, I'm getting clothes from France, I'm getting furniture from England. When it comes into the colonies, I now have to pay a tax on that stuff, so my costs are rising, right? So what do people do when they don't like something? They try to avoid it. They don't like a law, they break the law. So the colonists start smuggling these goods in without paying the tax on it. Yeah. Is the king going to just let this go? No. So the king gets royal officers and tax officials and soldiers to hunt down the smugglers. This includes giving these tax officers and soldiers search warrants, called writs of assistance, to look for these smuggled goods. Do the colonists appreciate this? Absolutely not. Just think about it. You get arrested by the tax officers and the soldiers for smuggling. Well, yeah, you did it. Doesn't make you happy, though. And now you're an innocent colonist. You haven't been smuggling. And then these tax officers and soldiers are searching through your house and your barn and your warehouse to find this stuff. Most people who enjoy their freedom don't want the government, the cops, and the soldiers looking through your stuff, trying to find evidence of you committing a crime. This is going to be so unpopular, we remember this when we create our own government. Fourth Amendment. We are protected from unreasonable searches and seizures by the government. It's something we remember from back here when the British king and parliament passed these, gave soldiers these writs of assistance to search colonists' house for these untaxed goods. So today, as an American, I enjoy protections from the Fourth Amendment. Police can't search my private property without probable cause and a search warrant. Great. Oh man, Boston Tea Party. If you don't know a lot of early American history, you probably learned about this 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, whatever. There was restrictions on the sale of tea. Not technically a tax, but it affected how tea was sold in the colonies. And it wound up favoring the British Tea Company over colonial tea companies. The business people didn't like this, and the people didn't like this. So in Boston, the Sons of Liberty, this group of patriots who do all kinds of anti-British stuff, get an idea to protest the Tea Act. They're going to get disguised as Native Americans. They're going to sneak onto these British cargo ships, and they're going to destroy the tea. And when I was younger, I just couldn't really get it. I mean, some tea, who cares? Meemaws, sweet tea gets poured into Boston Harbor. Don't think of it like that. About 100 colonists destroy tons of British tea with a price tag of somewhere between $2 and $4 million. Yeah, that's going to hit you in the pocketbook. When the king and parliament find out that these people in Boston who've given them nothing but trouble destroy $4 million of British tea, are the king and parliament going to get angry? Absolutely they do. And oh yeah, like the whole city of Boston comes out to watch this and cheer them on. It becomes like this spectator event. If TikTok was back then, social media, little videos of colonists destroying tea would be all over the place, right? This makes Great Britain extremely angry, and they are going to try to punish Massachusetts with the coercive acts, coercive, fancy word, to force somebody to do something. So Parliament was making no, bones about it, calling it coercive acts. We're going to force you, Boston, to behave. The coercive acts, you can take a look here. It's a multitude of different restrictions and laws. One's going to shut down Boston Harbor until they pay back the tea they destroyed. Another one's going to effectively shut down town meetings and local government, which of course the colonists enjoy. Another one, and one of the ones that's going to have a big impact, is going to be called the Quartering Act. To keep control of the people of Boston, the British government's going to send all kinds of soldiers to Boston to keep order. And I could see the king saying, how can I make this hurt more and save me money? I'm going to make the soldiers live with the people of Boston. So now you have 2 soldiers living with you, and oh yeah, you got to feed them. The coercive acts are so bad that the people of Massachusetts call them intolerable acts. Things they will not tolerate, they will not stand for it. And this will just make things uglier, make people angrier and angrier. And is this going to wind up into a shooting fight here soon? It is. So, most of this is happening in Boston, Massachusetts right now, but the people in the other colonies see it and they start to worry. I'm a New Yorker, I'm from New Jersey, I'm from Georgia or Virginia, but I can see what Parliament the King is doing in Massachusetts, and I don't like it. I start thinking, I could be next. It could just as easily be these terrible things happening to me. So the colonies start banding together. They have this first big meeting called the First Continental Congress. What do they decide? They're going to do some boycotts and some other stuff. But the real thing I want you to know is they are going to basically write a protest letter to the British government. Makes sense, right? You're in an important relationship and it starts going wrong. Do you immediately break the relationship? No, you try to fix it first. And that's what the colonists are going to do. The colonists are going to do in trying to clean this place, sorry, in the First Continental Congress. In the First Continental Congress, delegates, representatives from the colonies meet and they decide, all right, let's write a letter to the king and parliament and let's try to fix these problems we have. And it works, right? No. King isn't having any of this. Parliament isn't going to listen to these reasonable demands from the people of the colonies. So it's not going to help any. And oh yeah, since this is called the First Continental Congress, is there going to be a second? Sure. Well, the shooting starts. What happens? British troops march out of Boston. They're going to go to Concord, where Massachusetts militia, their small army that the colony has, protect them from Native Americans, whatnot. The British troops are going to march out and they're going to snatch up all the weapons and ammunition that the Massachusetts militia has. Makes sense, right? If you have a threat, if you have these citizens that are misbehaving, you want to get them under control, you take their guns. Well, this plan doesn't work. Spies find out about this, and people like Paul Revere warn the colonists. The British are coming, the British are coming. Yes. So Paul Revere and others, he wasn't by himself, warned the people of Massachusetts that the British soldiers are marching out of Boston. They're going to try to steal, seize, snatch up their weapons. Probably going to try to arrest some of these Sons of Liberty too, right? Paul Revere warns the colonists, and instead of finding unarmed colonists sleeping in their beds, they find Massachusetts militia out, Minutemen, Massachusetts citizens ready to fight. And that's exactly what happens. The underdogs, the militia and the Massachusetts Minutemen, actually beat the British Army, the pride of England, one of the most powerful militaries in the world at the time, get defeated by the underdog. And the British wind up having to retreat all the way back from Boston with colonists from every window, from behind every tree, from behind every rock wall, shooting at them as they go. Yeah. Embarrassing defeat for England. Great victory for the colonists. But now the cat's out of the bag. We've spilled blood now. We've basically started a shooting war without even declaring war. What are we going to do next? So they're going to figure that out in the Second Continental Congress. You really have two big choices. You say you're sorry and try to make peace, or you say, you know what? We're going the way we're going. I've read my lock. Blood is spilled. Parliament and the king are never going to protect our natural rights like they're supposed to. So it's time to end this relationship, create our own country. Spoiler alert, you know how the Second Continental Congress is eventually going to vote on this. They're going to declare independence. It's going to be war. We're not going to fix the relationship and have peace. But before that decision is made, this guy Thomas Paine, recently come from England, writes this pamphlet. Real short book, really long letter or article, arguing that it's common sense that if you have a king, a government that's abusing you, you don't just tolerate it. You break up. You declare independence. There's like 500,000 copies of Common Sense. What does that mean? There probably wasn't even 2 million colonists. A third of them are children. So you got a copy of Common Sense, definitely for each family. And just about every other adult colonist, every third colonist has a copy of Common Sense. And Paine writes it in a very simple fashion so everybody can understand it. It's wildly popular, it's widely read, and it affects the Second Continental Congress. It's one of these last straws. It's the tipping point that kind of pushes us to war and declaring independence. EOC loves talking about Thomas Paine and loves you to understand those pieces parts. Thomas Paine argues that it is the right thing to do for the colonies to rebel If you understand your Locke, if you understand the social contract, if your government is not protecting your rights, it's common sense that you get rid of that government and govern yourself. He also explains how monarchy is just a crazy form of government and other things in there too. What else do they like you to know on the EOC? This idea that Paine was smart, and he wrote common sense in a way that the average American farmer, builder, storekeeper, blacksmith can understand. He didn't write it just so like smart, educated lawyers like Jefferson can understand it. The average American can and did read it or had it read to them or were aware of it, and it affects their decisions on, you know what? It's common sense. Time to form our own country. Let's fight Great Britain. The names up there, hopefully you recognize them in your past history. You understand some of the leading patriots and leading founding fathers in there at the Second Continental Congress. They're going to form an army, and they're going to pick a general to command it. And yes, you've heard this name before, George Washington. Very famous American. He starts as a military hero very young in the French and Indian War. He becomes a leading American, a Virginian, very respected and admired. He's picked to lead the army, and he does. Wonderful choice. Very successful and good for us. What else happens? We'll talk about this more later, but we got to form a government because we don't have one. The colonies each have their own colonial governments. So New York has a government that runs New York, New Jersey, Virginia, Virginia. But now we need a national government, and we create one, and it's called the Articles of Confederation. Confederation, a type of government where states are bound together in kind of a loose, weak organization where the states or the colonies hold a lot of power, but the central government is relatively weak. And that's exactly what's going to happen. We're going to create a pretty weak national government, and it is doomed to fail, and it does. Particularly for poor George Washington, who's trying to fight a war. His backup is going to be this government under the Articles, and they're going to be terrible. They can't get him money. They can't get him troops. They can't really help him at all. Poor George Washington feels left out on his own. He's not backed by a strong central government that really can help him out. He's going to learn a lesson from this. So are people like his military aide, Alexander Hamilton. We'll see how this pans out here in the future. But the poor Articles of Confederation, we need a government, so we create one. It's too weak. It's only going to last about 10 years and be replaced by the Constitution. Great. Talk a lot about that later. Jefferson, this is when he's older. When he writes the Declaration, he's going to be a lot younger. So Jefferson gets picked to write the Declaration of Independence. Our breakup letter. We are going to write a letter explaining to the colonists, King George III, and the rest of the world why we're doing what we're doing. Why are we breaking up? Why are we creating our own country? Why are we declaring independence? Jefferson, heavily influenced by Locke, talks about natural rights, talks about social contract. He lists a list of grievances, formal complaints. There's no doubt, when you read it, you know what we think the British government did wrong to us. All right? He lists them. Lists like 30 plus reasons why we can't stand it in this relationship anymore, why the king and parliament has broken the social contract with us, so the only right thing for us to do is recognize that and form our own government. All right? Famous stuff from the Declaration, which he basically plagiarizes it. Not really. Everybody knew he was talking about Locke. But basically, he goes full Locke. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. What are those rights? The right to life, liberty, and instead of Locke's property, he changes that to pursuit of happiness. Wonderful. Mr. Biankowski, translate that, 7th grade level. All right, Mr. B's 7th grade translation of Jefferson's famous part of the Declaration. We hold these truths to be clear and obvious, that all men are created equal, that they are given at birth rights that can't be taken away from them. And what are these rights? The rights to life, liberty, freedom, and the pursuit of happiness. Big stuff. You have to know. EOC will always have something like this. You need to know that Locke inspires Jefferson. He's inspired by other people too. History of Greece and Rome, and Rousseau and Voltaire. Let's focus on Locke, though. EOC question might give you this, and you got to explain how that's related to Locke and social contract theory. Yeah. Important stuff. Bet you a Chick-fil-A, number 1 from Chick-fil-A, you will see that again. Oh, that's for SWAT. You don't need that. Hopefully this lecture was useful and important to you. The next lesson is going to be this government we create, the Articles of Confederation. What is it going to be like? Weak, and it's going to fail. And then what do we got to do? We got to create a better government. And we do. It's called the, spoiler alert, the Constitution. And it serves us well from 1787 till today. Wonderful document, wonderful improvement over the Articles, wonderful government that's copied by a lot of countries around the world. The basic principles of our Constitution. Is this nation perfect? No one's perfect, but it gets us 240-ish years through all the trials and travails that history throws at us. And we're the richest, most powerful country on planet Earth. So you can argue that the Constitution has done something right. And then the Constitution is improvable. Can you change it? Absolutely. What? You can't change the Constitution. Yes, you can, and we do. There's a process. It's called the amendment process. We find if we have to add, subtract, change the Constitution, we can through amendments. Yeah, 27 of them. We'll get to that too. Have a great evening, afternoon, morning, whenever you're watching this. Get over the COVID. Get out of your quarantine. Come back to school. Can't wait to see you. Bye.